Hey, how's you going, boys? Mike here. Welcome back to Grampie's workshop. I'm glad you dropped in today. We're going to do some more work on our little small horsepower engine rebuild, lawnmower engine, the 3.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton. So what we're up to today is, I thought I was going to get right into some assembly, but what I'm going to do is take some time to try to analyze each of the parts so I can get a better understanding of what the part is and what it does. So we're going to start off with the crank and the sump case and what parts and pieces go in the crank. So it might be a little boring, but I'm going to go on a little journey of exploration here to try to discover what actually takes place inside the crankcase on these small engines. So inside the crankcase and the engine, there's lots of things take place, and I just want to try to get a better understanding of what some of those things are. One thing they spend a lot of time on is lubricating and making sure that all the parts get well lubricated. So we have here an opening where the camshaft will go. Here's where the crankshaft goes. So we have ports or passages for oil to get through here and into the actual face of the shaft that's running in this journal. And then there's an oil groove here, the same up here. There's actual ports machined into that to allow oil to flow in or out of the area that needs to get lubrication. This hole right here, I think that one goes right through into the crankcase, and I think this hole is to equalize the pressure on the oil seal, because there's an oil seal that goes on the top of this to keep oil in the crankcase, because our crankshaft comes through here. So that's just to maintain oil pressure, or to reduce oil pressure to prevent the seal from being damaged. Same thing happens in the sump bottom. We have these openings machined here to allow oil, there's an oil groove there, to allow oil to get in there to lubricate the crankshaft journal. So lots of lubrication points, that's for sure. Also, if we look here, I have the valves just sitting in these openings for now. I'll take them out. I noticed that the exhaust valve was larger than the intake valve. I was wondering about that. Why would that be that way? And when I read about it a little bit, what I find out is the exhaust valve is smaller for a couple of reasons. One, as the air-fuel mixture in the cylinder gets compressed and the spark ignites and it explodes, then we have that rapidly expanding gas forcing, you know, it's got to go somewhere, right? So one of the things it does is force the piston back down. Another thing is the exhaust valve opens just around that time, so we have that rapidly expanding gas and it pours out the exhaust valve, and then the piston comes down and then it comes back up again and forces any unburned gases back out there. So we have a couple of things taking place to get exhaust gases out of the cylinder. We have the rapidly expanding gas plus the piston coming up. When it comes time to bring air-fuel mixture back into the cylinder, the exhaust valve closes, the intake opens, and the only thing then to bring air-fuel mixture into the cylinder is the actual vacuum that's created when the cylinder goes down. So we have a little bit of mechanical force, if you want to call it, drawing fuel air into the cylinder, but when it explodes we have the rapidly expanding gas plus the piston coming up that helps the exhaust gases go out. So we need a bigger opening to get as much air fuel into the cylinder as we can, and then we just open the little hole and let it out. The other thing too is when the intake valve closes, we'll say at combustion, the intake valve is closed, so the only part of that valve that gets exposed to heat is the face of it. But when we have combustion, the intake valve is open. Well, much exaggerated here, it would never open that much, but it's open, so the exhaust gases not only heat up the face of the valve, but also the underside of it too, and also the valve stem as they rush past it to escape from the cylinder. So the exhaust valve can get hotter. It does get hotter, and if you make it smaller, there's less metal in there to react to temperature changes, maybe warp, bend, or split, or something like that. So that's another reason why exhaust valves are smaller. This is a mechanically governed machine. So I'll just talk about that a little bit. In the sump base, there's locators machined or milled or fabricated here. There's one little shoulder built up here. There's this foot at the bottom, and there's a little wing on that side. So our governor gear will sit on those and be located by those pieces. And then the cam gear will go in here. So as you see, the cam gear engages with the mechanical governor. At 0 speed, these counterweights on the governor are collapsed like that, but as soon as we start to rotate the engine, centrifugal force forces those away and pushes out the center pin. That center pin gets aligned with this lever here in the crankcase cover, and then as that pin comes in and out, this lever will move back and forth. That lever goes through attached to a shaft, and on this shaft there's another lever attached, and that controls the throttle of the engine. So as the engine speed increases, this pin comes out further, and that pin comes out further. It forces the governor lever away, and that governor lever attached to the shaft and the lever to the throttle lessens the amount of throttle to the engine, which slows the engine down. When the engine slows down, this lever comes back in a little bit, which means that this changes position, and when that changes position, it adds to the throttle in the engine, and anyway, all that put together will should maintain a constant speed in your engine. So this is a mechanical governor, as opposed to some small engines that just have a vane that's attached to the throttle, and that vane gets air blown on it by the flywheel, and that will control your speed. But this is the mechanical governor, just a little different version. Another important thing about this governor gear is these little protruding wings on it. This is the oil sump, so we have oil bath in here. It's not a bath, we have oil. The level of the oil comes almost to this joint, so it doesn't reach that joint, it's a little bit below it, but then that governor gear is pretty well immersed in oil, and as it spins, these little protrusions, they're called slingers, oil slingers, and they make sure that the oil gets splashed around good inside the crankcase to get to all the different points in here that need lubrication. Okay, and also here we see like the grooves machined to make sure we get lubrication to these joints on the cam gear. So that's mechanical governing. Also, this engine has decompression for starting. If you notice on the cam gear, this little mechanism right here, it's a little clip that goes over the cam gear, and it's spring loaded. There's a spring that goes around that end, that arm, and then the other end of it sits in here. There's even a little piece built up on the cam gear to make sure that that spring is located correctly. Anyway, what that does is this shoulder on that clip, it's just enough of elevation to just barely crack open the exhaust valve as it's turning around. So as we're trying to start the engine with 0 speed, there's some compression built up, so as this turns around, that shoulder will just touch on the exhaust valve gasket, tap it, it will just touch on the exhaust, tap it, crack open the exhaust valve. We'll lose that little bit of compression and make it easier to turn over. But once the engine starts to rotate, then the counterweights of these big wings on that clip, due to the centrifugal force, those counterweights will fly away, and it moves this shoulder away closer to the gear and away from the tappet so that it doesn't hit on the tappet anymore, and it doesn't open and close the tappet to decrease the compression. So during startup at 0 speeds or minimal speeds, we'll open the exhaust valve just a tiny little bit to reduce compression, but once it starts to spin up, it'll move away, and then we won't have the decompression anymore. So that's an interesting thing. I've had these apart before, and I noticed that this clip is mangled up pretty bad. And I often wondered, what kind of effect that would have on the engine. And the only effect it would be is it would be harder to start the engine. Okay. Another thing too, if we look here at the crankshaft has got these machined shoulders in here, and they're rounded, these transitions. here on the where the piston connects to, they're rounded transitions. The reason they are rounded is because if that were a right angled transition, that would become a very weak point in the shaft, and chances are it could crack or break. Just that little bit of a shoulder on there provides a whole lot more strength to the shaft, and you don't want your crankshaft to break. So then what happens is this key right here is for the timing gear. So on our timing gear, a couple of things here. First of all, on the top of the timing gear there's a little dot on one of the teeth, and that's our timing mark for valve timing. This is valve timing I'm talking about. And also this is kind of a right angle here. But on the bottom side there's no timing marks on the teeth, but also there's a kind of a chamfer machined into this gear. So if we were to put this gear in upside down, a couple of things would happen. First of all, it fits on there quite nice, but there's a gap right in here, right? It doesn't fit down tight against the counterweights of the crankshaft, and also we can't see your timing marks. So the way this timing gear goes on, it's the chamfered side goes against the counterweights. So then it fits tight here against the counterweights, and also we have our timing mark visible. And that timing mark lines up with, on the camshaft, this indentation here on the camshaft gear. So when everything gets assembled together, the crankshaft will go in here, something like that. Our timing gear then goes on here, something like that. Then we'll have our tappets go in. I'm just going to put the exhaust tappet in for now, just for demonstration purposes. I'm going to set my timing mark right here, and then I'm going to take the timing mark on the cam gear and I'm going to line those two up as best I can, right there. So now that mark is aligned with the timing mark. So then as the engine rotates, I think it goes this way, and then if I just feel this exhaust tappet in here with my thumb, I can feel it but you can't, but right there I can feel the exhaust tappet going up, so that's opening the exhaust valve. Then it closes, and then in the next half turn right there I can just feel that little decompression spring opening and cracking open the exhaust valve. So there, the valve is open, just cracks it open ever so much, so slightly. So that's how all that comes together. And then of course the governor is going to go on here, and our governor lever is going to go on here, and when we put the sump base on, that's going to locate the governor here so that it doesn't wobble around, stays in a correct position. It's interesting. I find it interesting. I hope you found it interesting too. As I put this engine back together, we'll get in probably more detail or maybe less detail depending on how things are going when I'm putting it together. But for now, this was just sort of a journey of discovery for me, just to make sure I understand what's going on inside the motor. And in my next video about this engine rebuild, we'll start assembling things. So thanks for tuning in for this. I hope you found it interesting. Well, I ended up digging into that crankcase pretty deep there. I wasn't planning on going that deep. It's interesting, how it all comes together and makes an engine. And those little engines, they're just little tiny things, but there's a lot goes on in them. So the next episode I hope to start some assembly and putting some bits and parts and pieces in that crankcase and assembling it, and then of course analyzing other aspects of the engine as well. So that's what she's all about. Thanks for watching. I sure appreciate you tuning in. Hey, and if you made it this long, congratulations. Oh, and you can thumbs up me too if you like. I don't mind that at all. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm sure glad you stopped by. Thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day to watch my videos, and we'll talk to you.